Hello, and welcome to Chapter 4 of the Wink Getting Started series entitled Adding Frames to Your Inventory. In this video, we'll be reviewing steps 16 through 20 of the Getting Started process, which describes the process for entering frames in your inventory as either an opening balance item for frames you purchased before you began using Wink, or as a newly received product from a supplier for frames you purchased after you began using Wink. We're also going to show you how to print labels with barcodes to affix to your frames. You should have by now watched Chapter 3 of the Getting Started series entitled Peripherals, Suppliers, and Product Categories. In that video, we described the process for connecting peripheral devices like barcode scanners and label printers to your PC. We also reviewed the process for configuring your laser printer. Finally, we reviewed the process for creating accounts for your suppliers and for modifying product categories. Now then, Chapter 4 begins here. Step 16, Inventory Management, Frames. Your Wink software has the ability to track each and every frame in your practice from the moment it arrives in the store to the moment you sell it to a patient, from the time it leaves your practice to go to the lab to the time it returns. However, in order to properly manage your inventory, it's necessary to first give you a high-level description of the inventory management process, so as to ensure that you enter your data correctly. Wink essentially categorizes inventory in two ways. The first is the inventory, or for today's purposes, the frames, you purchased before you began using Wink. Wink refers to that as an inventory opening balance. The cost of those frames has already been accounted for, likely in another software, so Wink refers to it as an opening balance. The second is the inventory, or the frames, you purchased from suppliers after you began using Wink. In Wink terminology, that's just regular inventory. For the most part, your daily operations will only ever be concerned with regular inventory. However, when you first begin using Wink, you'll need to enter the frames you already owned as your opening balance of frames. To show you what we mean by opening balance, let's move on to step number 17 of the Getting Started process. Create frames as part of opening balance. Let's assume that right now you have 1,000 frames in your store. These 1,000 frames need to be entered in Wink as an opening balance, because we're going to assume that you've already accounted for them in your accounting software, like QuickBooks. There are 4 ways to enter frames as an opening balance in Wink. Each has their own benefits and drawbacks. You can pick the one you like best. The first way, option A, is to provide Wink with your list of frames so that we can import them for you. The cost for that data import is a one-time charge of $25, and all you have to do is type or copy-paste your data into a spreadsheet. The good news is, this is a very fast and precise way to enter your inventory opening balance, and you can be up and running in as little as a day or two. The second way, option B, is via integration with Frames data. This is also a very fast and precise way to enter your data, but it requires your purchasing a monthly subscription to Frames Data IDA. The third option for inserting your opening balance into Wink, option C, is to enter all the data yourself. That option is totally free, but as you can imagine, it's subject to typos, and is certainly the most time-consuming option of the 3 just described. Finally, some practices are not interested in inventory management. For practices that don't want to enter their inventory opening balance into Wink, we have a fourth option, option D, called the generic method. The generic method is extremely fast and again totally free of charge, but as you're about to see, in choosing this method, you're actually just skipping the inventory opening balance data entry process. Now let me take you through those 4 options one at a time. Before I begin, please note that Wink inventory management is actually a 2-step process. You must first create the product in your Wink database. You can then add that product to your practice's inventory. So, if you have a diesel frame in your store, model 87, you first have to create that frame in Wink by typing the word diesel, then DL0087, then enter the frame's dimensions, its color, and finally its price. Then you'll click on Save, and by doing so, you've actually created that new frame in your Wink database. Once that step is completed, you can then add that that frame to your store's inventory. Now, Wink will usually combine those two steps into a single process, so you usually won't even realize that you're doing those two different things. Nevertheless, sometimes you will want to do one, but not the other. Let me show you what we mean by that. As discussed earlier, option A for inserting your inventory opening balance into Wink is to provide Wink with a list of your frames in an Excel spreadsheet so that the data can be imported for you. Here's how to do that. When you first created your private database, you were sent this email. Now, simply click on this link to download this Excel workbook. Now, all you need to do is type or copy-paste your frames into this spreadsheet. Please read the instructions at the top of the page before doing so. Then, when you're done, go to the Wink store, select the Frame Upload option in your Services tab, and follow the on-screen instructions to have your frames uploaded. And that's it. We're done. Now, we're not at the stage yet where we show you how to make a sale. That will be reviewed in detail in Chapter 8. But for purposes of clarification, I'm going to show you what a frame sale looks like now. You've likely already watched the Wink for Beginners video, so you should be somewhat familiar with this page by now. This is the RX worksheet. It's attached to an invoice for a sale of frames and lenses. If you choose this or any other method for entering your inventory opening balance, then when it comes time to selling your frames via the RX worksheet, you'll see this. First, select From Stock. Next, type your frame's model number and press Enter. Next, if there's more than one frame in your database with that same model number, you'll have to select it from this list, like this. And there you have it. As you can see, all of the frame's data appears properly. A price has automatically appeared, and the frame's measurements are here as well, which means all the work of communicating this data to your lab is already done. Best of all, Wink can generate reports based on this inventory. I've already uploaded 5 frames to my inventory, so let's generate a typical inventory report together. To do so, let's close this page and click on Reports, Inventory, Current Inventory, Frames. Now let's generate a report for today's date and move ahead to page 3. As you can see here, this report is showing the type, quantity, and value of each of those 6 frames that I uploaded to my inventory. Now imagine if we had 1,000 frames here. We could categorize them by brand, by type, by gender, and so much more. Okay, let's close this now. That now concludes option A for entering your inventory opening balance. Let's move on now to option B. Option B is to create your inventory opening balance using frames data. When you subscribe to frames data, Wink will put at your disposal nearly 500,000 frames. Now then, here's how to sync your Wink database with frames data. First, click on Settings. Next, click on Frames Data Activation. Now enter your frames data username, select your store's location from the drop-down list, and click on Activate. Please note the address you've provided frames data and your store's address in Wink must be identical, or else the procedure will fail. Next, allow Wink up to 24 hours to confirm your subscription and to sync your database. Then, to view your newly synced database, simply close Wink and relaunch it. Now, as I said before, inventory management is actually a 2-step process. First, you create the frame in the database, then you add it to inventory. Well, when you sign up with frames data, Wink automatically creates 500,000 frames in your database. So all you have to do now is add the ones you want to your store's inventory. That's why it's actually a 2-step process. This now brings us to step 18 of the Getting Started process, how to barcode your opening inventory. Here's how you do that. To begin, click on File. Next, select Barcode Opening Inventory. In my hand, I have 2 frames. I'm going to type the model number of that first frame in here. CG0421. Enter. The next thing to do is to select the frame which I have in my hand. It happens to be the second one at the top here, so I'll double click on it. Now, as you can see, Frames Data has entered all the information regarding this frame. All I have to do now is enter my price. So in this case, this frame will be sold for $289. If you're fixing labels with barcodes to your frames, then leave this box checked off. Otherwise, unselect it. I'm going to leave it checked as we strongly recommend labeling and barcoding frames to all our customers. Next, click on Add to Inventory. Next, click on Save and Print. And finally, click on Print. And there you have it. That's how you create an inventory opening balance using Frames Data. Okay, let's do that again. Let's enter the next model number in this field. And press Enter. Now again, double-click on the frame you wish to add to your inventory. And as you can see, all the information appears. Again, enter your price. And if you'd like, you can also define how you wish for this particular frame to appear on your invoice by typing it here. Finally, when you're done, just as before, click on Add to Inventory. Click on Save and Print, and click on Print. And there you have it. That's how you create an inventory opening balance using Frames Data. By the way, the process we just described for barcoding your opening inventory is also available to people who request that their frames be uploaded. In other words, option A. Now then, the third option for adding frames to your inventory as an opening balance is option C. Manually type the data in Wink yourself. Remember that you first have to create the frame in the database and then add it to your inventory. Here's how you do that. First, click on Frames. What you see here is a list of everything in Frames Data, but if you've selected to enter all the data yourself, this list won't appear, so just ignore it. Now, click on New to create a new frame. I currently have in my hand a Wink frame, model WK999. Let's enter this now. First, enter the brand. Next, enter the model number. Next, enter your frame's dimensions. Next, enter the frame's color name, or enter the frame's color code. Below this are a number of fields which you can also at your discretion enter information into. I'm going to skip most of them, but I'm going to highlight for you this product category field, as it is something that was described in Chapter 2 of the Getting Started series. Product categories are ways of categorizing your products in your store. For example, you can categorize them as economy, low-end, mid-range, high-end, or luxury. For the purposes of our demonstration here today, I'm going to select mid-range. Next, click on the Cost Price tab. Under normal circumstances, you would enter your cost for this frame. However, because we're currently at the inventory opening balance stage, this information may not necessarily be readily available. In other words, you may have purchased this frame a year ago. You may not necessarily know how much you paid for it or who you bought it from. For that reason, you can leave the cost price empty and move on to retail price. In retail price, enter the default price for which this frame should be sold. I'm going to say $200. In this minimum price field, you can enter the minimum price at which any member of your staff can sell this frame. For example, $150. The minimum price field is a price floor, which permits your staff the ability to negotiate between the list price and a certain price floor that you will have set. You may at your discretion also leave this blank. Next, sales tax. If this particular item is subject to sales tax, select your tax code here. Tax codes were also discussed in Chapter 2. If there is no sales tax applicable to this item, simply leave it blank. Finally, when you're done, click on the green check mark. Next, inventory opening balance. Because this is part of your inventory opening balance, it is necessary to enter your opening balance quantity here. 1. And we're done. You can now click on Save. However, before doing so, I just want to show you a couple other tabs with information here. For example, Tracing. At this point, you can select the type, shape, and gender for this frame. You can also enter your B and ED measurements. If you connect Wink to a tracer, your tracer of that frame can appear here. If synced with frame's data, an image of the frame can also appear here. You may at your discretion also upload your own images if you so wished. And there you have it. You don't necessarily need to fill out all the information which I've just entered, but at a minimum for all of your inventory, you should have the brand, the model, the dimensions, color, and price. Of course, if it's part of your inventory opening balance, you should also put a 1 in the quantity field over here. If you don't know the value of that inventory opening balance, don't worry about it. It'll be entered automatically by the system at a later date. Now then, when you're done, simply click on Save. And there you have it. That's how you can manually enter all of your inventory opening balance. Now then, as discussed, some of you will prefer not to enter your opening balance at all, because you're not really concerned with inventory management. Nevertheless, you still want to use Wink to sell the frames you have in your store. For those of you who prefer this alternative, we offer you option D, the generic method. As mentioned earlier, the generic method is very fast, and of course totally free of charge. But by implementing these steps, you're actually circumventing proper inventory management procedures. Nevertheless, we don't want to slow you down, so here it is. The first thing to do, as before, is to click on Frames. Again, for the same reason as before, ignore the frames you see here. My database is synced with frames data. Yours is not. Now then, to create your first frame in the Wink database, click on New. Now, just as before, the first step in creating any frame, be it generic or otherwise, is to enter the brand and model of that frame. So the brand for this generic frame will be my store's name, Point of View. And the model number will simply be Frame. Next, click on the Retail Price tab and click on the green check mark. This essentially sets the default retail price for this frame at $0. Finally, click on Save. And I'm done. That's really all there is to it. By the way, notice how I never clicked on the Opening Balance tab? Notice how I never entered a quantity in this field? So essentially all I did was create the frame in the database, but I did not add it to inventory. To illustrate that point further, I'm going to regenerate that inventory report that I generated earlier. Click on Reports, Inventory, Current Inventory, Frames, and Generate. Let's move ahead now to page 3, and let's zoom in. As you can see, the point of view frame we created is not showing up here because we've not added it to our store's inventory. Having created the product as an item in the database, however, means that we can sell it. And when we do so, it will actually appear as a negative value in this report. Now then, selling a generic frame is slightly more complicated than selling a non-generic frame. To illustrate that point more clearly, I'm going to bring you back to the RX worksheet. Now then, just as before, select From Stock and type the brand or model number for your frame. Point of View. Enter. Now, unlike earlier when the price and dimensions automatically appeared, when selecting a generic frame, you're going to have to type this data in here by yourself. So I'll do that now. And I'm done. Now let me show you what that looks like on an invoice. As you can see, you have your frame there with your price, and if you'd like, you can add a description like this. And there you have it. As discussed, the generic method is definitely the fastest way to get started, but as you can see, you're going to have to enter this missing data on the RX worksheet every time you make a sale. But the biggest drawback of all is that you're actually not doing proper inventory management, because Wink doesn't know how many or what kind of generic frames you have in your store until after they've been sold. Okay, I'll close this up now. Okay, so that covers the process for entering your inventory opening balance. As discussed, there are 3 ways to do so. You can choose whichever you prefer, or if inventory management is not a concern for your practice, you can skip it altogether using the generic method. The most common option is option A, where we simply import your data for you at a one-time cost of $25. But Frames data is also a very popular choice because it's not only relevant for your inventory opening balance, but also for your regular inventory purchases as well. The next step of the getting started process is step number 19, close the inventory opening balance. This step is very easy, but it's also very important. When you've finished adding all your frames into your store's inventory, you must close your inventory opening balance. Doing so will ensure that regular inventory purchases in the future are not accidentally entered as inventory opening balance. Doing so is also a requirement for Wink integration with accounting software like QuickBooks, Simply Accounting, Wave, and Xero. Now then, to close your inventory opening balance, click on Stores. Next, double-click on your store's location. Next, click on Edit. And finally, click on Inventory Opening Balance Closed. Then, click on Save. And we're done. And there you go. That's how you close your inventory opening balance. Again, it's important to do that as soon as you've finished entering your store's inventory opening balance. If you choose option A or option B, then you'll likely click on that in a few days. If you choose option C, manual data entry, then depending on how many frames you have in your store, you should be able to click on that button in a week or so. Finally, if you choose option D, the generic method, then you'll likely click on it immediately. The important thing to remember is that you must click on it as soon as possible to avoid possible data entry errors in the future. Okay, so that's how you close your inventory opening balance. The last step of Chapter 4 of the Getting Started process is step number 20. Receive frames from suppliers as regular inventory for frames purchased after installation of Wink. Here's how you do that. Now then, there are 2 ways to enter regular inventory. Essentially, it comes down to whether you have a Frames data subscription or not. If you do, then receiving frames from manufacturers like Luxottica, Safilo, Marchon, and Marcolin is very easy. But don't worry, if you don't have a Frames data subscription, the process is still very easy, just a little bit less automated. As discussed, entering your inventory opening balance is something you'll do only for the first week or so when you first begin using Wink. The process I'm about to describe, however, is the process for entering regular inventory in Wink, and that's something you'll be doing on an ongoing basis, because it's the procedure for entering frames in Wink that you receive from suppliers. Now then, to begin, click on Product Receive Transfer. Next, click on New, because these are new frames that we're receiving. At this time, you should have 2 things in your hand. The first is the invoice from your supplier. The second are the frames associated with that invoice. Essentially, what we're going to do now is recreate your supplier's invoice in Wink. By doing that, Wink is able to say exactly how much those frames cost you, which is the basis for profitability reports. By doing that, Wink will also be able to say when you received those frames, which in turn permits Wink to produce inventory aging reports. Earlier we showed you what a current inventory report looks like. All other reports will be covered in detail in Chapter 10 of the Getting Started series. Now then, in this first field at the top here, select your supplier. You can type, and then select. Next, select your account number. Finally, in this third field, enter your supplier's invoice number. Invoice numbers are also known as document numbers. Please note, this number must be unique. You will not be able to enter two identical invoice or document numbers from the same supplier in Wink. Finally, select your invoice date here. By default, today's date will appear. Next, place your cursor in this field and type the model number for the first frame on your supplier's invoice. And press enter. Again, if there are many frames in your database with the same model number, you'll have to select the one which you have in your hand. And there you have it. It's been added to this recreation of my supplier's invoice. I'll do that again now. And press enter. Again, if there are many frames with the same model number in your database, they'll appear in this list. Simply double-click on the one in your hand, and there you have it. Now, as it turns out, this last frame I received is a really good seller, so I actually bought 5 of them. To modify the quantity, simply select it and enter the new quantity. And there you have it. Again, just as before, if this item is subject to sales tax, you can select your tax code here. If it isn't, simply leave it unchecked. Oh, and by the way, because this frame happens to be a really good seller, I want Wink to advise me when my quantity of this frame drops below a certain threshold. To do that, click on these 3 dots. Next, click on Inventory Minimum Quantities. Now click on Edit. Now what you want to do is set your minimum quantity for this frame. So, when my quantity for this particular frame drops below 3 in my store, I want Wink to advise me so that I can go out and reorder it. Now, click on Save and close. Now, these first 2 frames were very easy because they already existed in the database, so Wink was able to find the data and simply display it for us. Notice how our cost and our retail price appeared on both occasions. In certain cases, however, especially when you first start using Wink, your frames will not already be in the Wink database, so you'll first have to create them before you can add them to your inventory. Here's an example of that situation. In my hand I have a frame, model number WK123. I'll enter that value in here now. And press enter. As you can see, Wink was unable to find that product. Now, before creating that product, enter the model number in a slightly different way, just in case it was originally spelled differently. For example, I'll add a space to it. WK space 123. Enter. And again, Wink didn't find it. Okay, so now that I'm satisfied that the frame is not currently in my Wink database, I click on Create New Product. Next, click on Frame. By now, this should be a page that you're very familiar with. Again, in this field at the top here, type your brand. In the field below it, type your model number. In the field below that, enter your dimensions. Enter your frame color. Next, just as before, you can select a product category or move on to your cost price. Now earlier we weren't able to enter a cost price because it was our inventory opening balance. We may have purchased that frame a year ago, so we had no way of knowing what the cost of that frame was. Now, with respect to regular inventory, I actually have my supplier's invoice in front of me, so I can enter the cost for this frame. Again, if necessary, select a tax code. If not, simply click on the green check mark. Next, enter your retail price. And click on the green check mark. If you wanted to, you could enter tracing data, but you should not enter any information as opening balance because this is not an opening balance item, it's a regular inventory item. So now that we've done entering all that data, I simply click on Save. And there you have it. The item has been created in the database, and it is now appearing on this recreation of my supplier's invoice. The next time I buy this particular frame, simply by typing its model number, it will appear just as these first two did. Now then, here's why we recommend frames data. When you have frames data, you actually have much less data entry to do. Just as I did for the Wink 123 frame, I will now add 2 more frames that I never received in the past. Earlier, I had to enter all the data myself. This time, all I'm going to have to do is enter my cost and retail price, because frames data has all the rest. To do this, place your cursor in this field, and using your Honeywell barcode scanner, scan the UPC code on the frame. And there you have it. As you can see, the wholesale price for the frame has appeared. It's currently showing that it's retailing for $0. That's because I've never received it in the past. To update this information, simply click on More and update retail price. Now, just as before, in the default price space, enter your default price for this frame and press Tab. Next, this by default is the way the frame will appear on your invoice. If you want it to appear differently, simply type it. Finally, click on Save. And there you have it. Your price has been updated. I'll do that again now. Simply scan the next UPC code on the next frame that you've received from your supplier. And there you have it. Again, your retail price is appearing at 0 because you've never actually received this product before. To update that, simply click on More and update retail price. Again, enter your retail price. And again, if you want, you can update your print on invoice as field. Otherwise, simply click on Save. Finally, just as before, even with a subscription to frames data, you will on occasion be required to create your frames. Here's an example of that situation. I have a frame here with a model number of WK456. I'll enter that value in here and press Enter. Again, just as before, the product is not found. Again, change up the model number just in case it was entered differently. Press Enter again. It's still not found. Okay, so create it by clicking on Create New Product. Frame. Type the brand, the model number, the dimensions, the frame color name, enter your cost price, select the green check mark, enter your retail price, select the green check mark, and click on Save. The last thing to add to this invoice is a shipping charge. Not all suppliers charge for shipping, but some do, and if so, you'll need to add a shipping charge to your invoice. To do so, come in here and type the word shipping and press Enter. Next, enter the shipping charge in here and press Tab or Enter to confirm the amount. Okay, so I've finished recreating my supplier's invoice in Wink. In my hand, I have the original invoice from my supplier, and it shows a total of 11 frames at a total cost of $580. In Wink, I have the same total of frame and the same total of dollars. So now, I'll click on Save. By clicking on Save, I've completed the second step of the process adding the frames to my inventory, because until I clicked on Save, these quantities had not been added to my store's inventory. Now, if you're not barcoding your frames, you can simply close this page and place your frames in the display cases for sale to patients. If, however, you are barcoding your frames, then we've made the process of printing those barcode labels very easy. Essentially, just click here on Print Barcodes. Next, click on Save and Print. Finally, click on Print. And out of your printer should come all the labels required for all the frames you've just purchased from that supplier. Now that your labels have all printed, simply place them on your frames like this, and place the frames in your display cases for sale to patients. And that's it. That's how to receive new frames from suppliers as regular inventory. To summarize Chapter 4, when you first begin using Wink, you will enter all frames which you purchased and accounted for before you began using Wink as an opening balance. There are 4 ways to enter frames as an opening balance. You can ask Wink to upload the data for you, you can subscribe to Frames Data IDA, or you can create them all manually by yourself. Finally, you can skip that step altogether using the generic method. No matter which option you choose, you have the option of barcoding your frames or not. We of course recommend the barcoding, as it's more organized and easier to manage frame inventory using barcodes rather than via traditional pen and paper. Then, going forward, for all new purchases of frames or other inventory that you purchase after you begin using Wink, you will enter your purchases in Wink as regular inventory. There are 2 ways to do that. You can manually type the data yourself, or you can take advantage of your Frames data subscription. Again, you have the choice of barcoding your frames or not. And again, we recommend barcoding. And there you have it. That's how you create frames in the Wink database, and how you add them to your practice's inventory. Moving on, in Chapter 5 of the Getting Started series, we'll review the process for reprinting barcodes, adjusting inventory, returning frames to suppliers, and doing an inventory audit. So stay tuned for that. We hope you've enjoyed this video. We look forward to working with you further. Thanks and have a great day. Was this video helpful? Are you enjoying Wink? Spread the word. Share Wink on your social media page.